"You don't belong in this house anymore, Briar." Callum Vane, 41-year-old husband of Briar Vale Vane, said it in the front hall of Graykin Estate, while his mother watched from the staircase like she had waited years to hear those words. In his hand was a sealed divorce packet. Beside him stood Maribel Vane, 66-year-old mother of Callum and controlling trustee of the family estate, holding Briar's house keys like they were a trophy. Briar Vale Vane, 38-year-old wife of Callum, stood there with one suitcase beside her and rain tapping against the tall windows. She had spent 12 years protecting that estate, saving his staff from missed payroll, calming vendors, correcting loan documents before they became disasters, and quietly helping his company survive crisis after crisis. But tonight, no one thanked her. Sable Cross, 32-year-old mistress of Callum and brand consultant for Vane Meridian Holdings, stood near the staircase wearing Briar's pearls. She smiled and said, "Some women are only allowed inside a family until the real future arrives." Briar looked at Callum, waiting for him to defend her. He did not. Instead, he said, "Sign the divorce settlement when it comes. Don't fight people bigger than you." Briar did not scream. She did not beg. She only looked at the man she had loved, then at the keys in his mother's hand, and understood that they had not just ended a marriage. They had tried to erase her before she could ask questions. But Callum did not know the truth. He did not know Briar secretly controlled Astafall Bank and Trust through Vale Lantern Trust, the private family trust left by her late father before their marriage and protected by documents Callum had signed years ago without reading carefully. He did not know Astafall was the bank holding Vane Meridian's emergency loans, estate-backed credit lines, and final chance at refinancing. He did not know the quiet wife his mother called useless had been the silent reason his business had not collapsed years earlier. And when Callum filed for divorce, he made one fatal mistake. His lawyers demanded that Briar waive any right to examine his company's finances and sign a statement saying she had no direct or indirect connection to any lender tied to his business. That sentence opened the door to everything. Days later, Callum walked into an emergency executive meeting at Astafall Bank, expecting to beg for another extension. Maribel sat beside him. Sable arrived dressed like victory. Then the boardroom doors opened and Briar walked in. Leora Penn, 42-year-old chief risk officer of Astafall Bank, stood and said, "Good morning, Chairwoman Vale. Stay with this story until the end, because the woman they threw out with one suitcase is the same woman connected to the loan files that can take his company, expose his mistress, and place the family estate they worshipped under recovery. Subscribe now and comment, Karma, if you believe loyalty should never be mistaken for weakness. Some betrayals do not break a quiet woman. They wake the part of her that was patient enough to wait for the right room, the right documents, and the right moment to let the truth speak." By 6 in the morning, Briar Vale Vane was already walking into the building that might destroy her marriage. The front of Vane Meridian Holdings looked powerful from the road, all dark glass, silver letters, and polished stone. But Briar did not enter through the executive lobby where her husband's name shone on the wall. She entered through the employee door at the side, carrying 2 folders, a coffee for the night guard, and an unopened envelope from Astafall Bank and Trust that had been delivered to Graykin Estate by mistake. Callum had listed Graykin as an emergency notice address during the last renewal because he wanted lender documents away from nervous employees. That mistake had placed the envelope in Briar's hands, unopened but impossible to ignore. The envelope was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Vane Meridian Holdings. That was why she had not opened it. Briar Vale Vane, 38, was Callum Vane's wife of 12 years and the daughter of the late Arlen Vale, the man people still associated with old banking power, even though most assumed his empire had been sold after his death. To most people inside the Vane family, Briar was quiet, graceful, and almost too soft-spoken for a house that rewarded volume. They saw the simple dresses, the calm voice, the way she stepped aside when powerful men entered a room. They did not see the woman underneath. Inside the employee corridor, the lights buzzed faintly. A few workers were already at their desks, pretending not to look worried. Someone had printed overdue vendor invoices and left them face down near the copier. Another employee whispered that a parts supplier had refused another delivery until old bills were paid. Briar heard it all. She always did. At the security desk, she handed the coffee to Orrin Hale, 67, the longtime estate manager of Graykin Estate, and one of the few people who had watched Briar protect the Vane family without ever asking for praise. That morning, Oren had come to the company office to deliver estate maintenance files Callum had requested for a lender review. "You should not have come this early, Mrs. Vane," Oren said, lowering his voice. Briar looked toward the accounting department, where the lights were already on. "Trouble never waits for a decent hour, Oren." He gave her a sad smile. He understood what others ignored. Briar was not visiting the company because she enjoyed being useful. She was there because Vane Meridian was bleeding quietly, and everyone around Callum was pretending the floor was not turning red. At the payroll desk, Nella Shaw, 24, a junior accountant at Vane Meridian and one of the youngest employees in the finance department, sat with red eyes and a stack of reports she kept trying to hide. Briar stopped beside her desk. "Did everyone get paid?" Nella opened her mouth, then closed it. That was answer enough. Briar placed one folder on the desk. Her voice stayed gentle. "Send the emergency staff hardship list through HR using the existing consent forms. Mark it as employee relief review, not payroll correction. Mark it as employee relief review, not payroll correction." Nella blinked. "Mrs. Vane, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Briar said. "You're documenting who needs help." Nella looked down quickly, fighting tears. "Mr. Vane said leadership stabilized payroll last quarter." Briar's expression did not change. "Then leadership can continue looking stable while the people who do the work keep their lights on." She walked away before Nella could thank her. That was how Briar had survived 12 years in the Vane family. She fixed problems quietly, then let Callum stand in front of cameras and call himself a visionary. She paid emergency staff support through private, premarital funds and charitable channels so no one could accuse her of disguising company debt. She calmed angry vendors before they sued. She warned Callum when his spending was reckless, and he dismissed her as if she had asked about garden flowers instead of debt. People thought Briar was small because she did not announce herself. That had once been her father's lesson. Years earlier, before she married Callum, Arlen Vale had taken her inside Astafall Bank and Trust after closing. Arlen Vale, her late father and the founder of the bank, had stood beneath the marble ceiling and placed one hand on her shoulder. "Never tell a man what you own before you know what he respects," he had said. "If he respects money, he will perform love. If he respects you, he will protect you before he knows your worth." After Arlen died, Briar inherited controlling ownership through Vale Lantern Trust, a private family trust created before her marriage. Public records showed the trust, not her married name. Board records used her maiden name, Briar Vale. Grayken staff called her Mrs. Vane. And because Callum had never cared enough to ask the right questions, he still believed her father's bank had been sold to outside investors years ago. The worst part was not that he had misunderstood. The worst part was that he had been proud of not caring. On the day they married, Callum had signed a premarital disclosure schedule prepared by Arlen's attorneys. It listed Vale Lantern Trust by name. Callum had laughed at the paperwork, called it old money paranoia, and signed without reading past the first page. Back then, Briar thought that meant he loved her beyond money. Now, standing in his failing company with an unopened bank envelope in her hand, she was no longer sure. Briar entered a private conference room and locked the door behind her. Only then did she open her secure tablet. The screen lit up. Astafall Bank and Trust, Chair Portal User. Vale Commercial Exposure Flag. Vane Meridian Holdings. Her eyes paused on the final line. Commercial exposure. That phrase was polite banker language for danger. Briar had stayed away from direct bank decisions involving Callum's company because she was married to him. Any file touching Vane Meridian had been handled by independent risk officers, outside counsel, and credit committees without her vote. She had insisted on that wall herself. Not because Callum deserved protection, but because the bank did. If the bank ever had to act against him, the record had to be clean. Before she could open the file summary, the door handle turned. Briar closed the tablet just as Callum Vane, 41, her husband and the public face of Vane Meridian Holdings, stepped inside wearing a dark suit and the easy confidence of a man who had never had to clean up the mess behind his own speeches. He noticed the tablet before she could move it fully away. "What's that?" he asked. "Some trust paperwork," Briar said. Callum gave a short laugh. "Still pretending those little charity committees are serious work." Briar smiled gently. "Something like that." He did not hear the edge beneath the softness. He never did. The door opened again, and Kea Voss, 45, the chief financial officer of Vane Meridian Holdings and Callum's most nervous business ally, stepped in holding a folder marked Astafall Renewal Package Urgent. Kea froze when he saw Briar. Briar noticed. Callum snatched the folder from him. Kea, not here. Briar looked from the folder to her husband. Is the renewal in trouble? Callum's face tightened. You wouldn't understand credit facilities, Briar. She did understand. She understood covenant breaches, collateral schedules, bridge financing, renewal conditions, and quiet default warnings better than anyone in that room. She also understood that a borrower who panicked at the sight of his wife near a bank envelope was not afraid of paperwork. He was afraid of what paperwork remembered, but she let the insult pass. For now, Callum's phone buzzed on the table. The screen flashed before he turned it over. "SK, tonight will prove who belongs beside you." Briar saw only the initials and the word beside. Callum moved too quickly. "Marketing consultant," he said, though she had not asked. Briar looked at him for one silent second, then she looked away. On her way out, she passed the employee break room. A framed photo from an old charity event hung near the vending machines. Callum stood at a podium, smiling as if he had saved the company himself. In the corner of the photo, half hidden behind a stack of envelopes, Briar was arranging donation checks for employees whose pay had almost been delayed. For 12 years, she had been close enough to save the Vane name, but never close enough to be thanked for it. Her private phone rang as she reached the glass hallway. The caller ID read, Leora Penn, Astafall Bank. Leora Penn, 42, was Astafall's chief risk officer and one of the few executives who knew Briar was the bank's controlling owner through Vale Lantern Trust. Briar answered quietly. Leora's voice was controlled, but tense. "Chairwoman Vale, I know you asked us to avoid involving you directly with your husband's company, but the Vane Meridian file has crossed into emergency territory." Briar stopped walking. Through the glass wall, she saw Callum laughing with Kea as if nothing in his world was cracking. Leora continued, "We are not asking you to vote. We are asking for authorization to convene an independent conflict-screened review. If the numbers are accurate, your husband's company may already be in default." Briar did not answer immediately. She only looked at the sealed Astafall envelope in her hand and realized that by nightfall, someone in that building would be forced to choose between truth and the life they had built on top of it. The first warning came before dinner, when Briar found her name moved to the edge of the seating chart. Her chair was no longer beside Callum's. It had been placed near the service doors. Briar stood in the dining room of Greykyan Estate, holding the guest list in one hand and the investor packets in the other. The long table glittered with polished silver and crystal glasses, but above it, a thin crack ran across the ceiling like a secret trying to split the house open. That was Greykyan, beautiful from far away, weak when touched. Maribel Vane, 66, Callum's mother and the controlling trustee of the Vane Residential Trust that held Greykyan Estate, entered the room with the slow confidence of a woman who believed every wall belonged to her. She wore pearls, a grey silk dress, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Move Briar farther down the table," Maribel said to the staff without looking at her. "Investors do not need to hear domestic softness when men are discussing survival." Briar looked at the seating chart again. Her voice stayed calm. "If survival is the topic, perhaps I should sit closer." The room went still. Maribel turned her head slowly. "You have always mistaken silence for intelligence." The words landed quietly, but they landed deep. Briar did not answer. She had learned long ago that Maribel enjoyed any pain she could make visible, so Briar gave her nothing. She only adjusted the investor packets and checked the order of the reports. Callum had forgotten 2 debt schedules, 1 vendor summary, and the updated payroll note. If Briar had not noticed, he would have walked into the dinner looking like a man who could not control his own company. Again. An hour later, the front doors opened. Sable Cross, 32, Vane Meridian's brand consultant, and the woman Callum had been hiding too carefully, stepped into Greykyan with 2 assistants carrying campaign boards for the company's legacy rebrand. She wore a pale-fitted dress, sharp heels, and amber perfume that reached the room before her smile did. Callum crossed the hall too quickly to greet her. Sable touched his sleeve, not long enough to be obvious, long enough to be intimate. Briar noticed. Sable turned to her with soft eyes and a polished voice. "Mrs. Vane, I've heard so much about how quietly you keep yourself busy." It sounded polite. It was not. Briar held her gaze. "Then you've heard almost nothing." For the first time, Sable's smile tightened. Callum cleared his throat. "Sable is helping us modernize the company image." Maribel stepped closer to Sable as if presenting a prize. "Some women understand how to stand beside ambition." Briar looked at the campaign boards. They showed Callum in dark suits, standing beneath words like legacy, strength, future. There was no mention of debt, no mention of delayed payroll, no mention of the bank file now flashing danger inside Briar's private tablet. The Vanes were not fixing the company. They were dressing it for a funeral and calling it a gala. During the final dinner preparations, Mara Quill, 54, the senior housekeeper at Greykyan Estate and one of the few staff members who still treated Briar with honest respect, appeared beside her near the east hallway. Her face was pale. "Mrs. Vane," Mara whispered, "I found this on the private staircase." She held out a pale silk scarf. Briar did not take it at first. The east staircase was not for guests. It led from the family wing down to the conservatory and Callum's private study. Staff used the back halls. Investors used the main stairs. Consultants had no reason to be there alone. Briar finally touched the scarf, amber perfume, the same scent Sable had carried into the house. Mara looked ashamed, as if she had brought Briar a wound instead of fabric. "I thought you should know." Briar folded the scarf once, then placed it inside her folder. "Thank you, Mara." Her voice was steady, but something inside her had gone very quiet. After the guests began arriving, Briar walked toward the library to collect the missing debt schedules. The door was not fully closed. Inside, Kaya's voice was sharp with fear. "The collateral values won't survive a real review." Callum snapped. "Then don't let Astafall do a real review." Briar stopped. Marable spoke from inside the room, calm and cold. "Use the West Gallery valuation again. The paintings have carried this family before." Briar's fingers tightened around the folder. The West Gallery. Her father had warned her about this kind of thing years ago. For a moment she was 22 again, sitting beside Arlen Vale at a bank training table while he taught her how to read loan schedules. He had pointed to a column of numbers and said, "A liar does not always hide debt, Briar. Sometimes he dresses the same debt in different clothes and asks two banks to admire it." Now standing outside Callum's library, Briar understood the shape of the danger. Marable was not just proud, she was reckless. If the West Gallery paintings had already been used as collateral once, using them again at a higher value could turn a weak renewal into a fraudulent one. And if Astafall Bank was asking questions, then the problem had already left the family table. It had entered the record. Briar stepped back before anyone saw her. The dinner moved forward with soft music, bright candles, and false confidence. Callum spoke to investors as if Vane Meridian was growing. Sable stood near him, laughing at the right moments. Marable watched Briar from across the room with a look that said she was already planning where to place the next knife. Later that night, after the guests spread through the estate, Briar followed the faint scent of amber perfume toward the conservatory. She did not run. She did not call Callum's name. She stopped outside the glass doors, where the dark window reflected the room inside. Callum stood behind Sable with his arms around her waist. The pale scarf was back around Sable's neck. Sable laughed softly. "You said she would be gone soon." Callum lowered his face near her hair. "After tomorrow she won't be in this house." Sable leaned into him. "Good, I'm tired of walking around another woman's ghost." Briar placed one hand against the door. For 12 years she had protected his name. She had saved his staff from missed paychecks, softened his mother's cruelty, and hidden his failures behind her own quiet competence. And he had turned her into a ghost while she was still breathing. She did not open the door. Her pain stayed private, but her silence changed. As she stepped away, voices drifted from near the study. Drayton Pell, 58, a Vane Meridian board member and Callum's old family friend, spoke in a low tone to Nolan Rusk. Nolan Rusk, 51, was the Vane family attorney, Marable's legal weapon, and the man who turned family cruelty into polished language. "Marable wants it clean," Drayton said. "No public scene until the papers are ready." Nolan answered. "The settlement blocks her from company records. She signs, she disappears." Briar froze, so it was not only cheating, it was a plan. She returned to her room and opened the Astafall chair portal again. Because she was conflicted, she could not open protected borrower documents without legal review, but the limited chair alert was visible. Risk status, escalated pending documents, collateral certification, board consent, spousal disclosure waiver conflict screened review recommended. Briar stared at the last words. "Spousal disclosure," she whispered. Before she could click the legal notice attached to the alert, the bedroom door opened. Callum stood there, his eyes dropping to the glow of her laptop. "What are you looking at?" Briar closed the screen with one calm hand. "Nothing you thought I could understand." Callum's face hardened. And in the silence between them, Briar finally understood that tomorrow had already been chosen for her. Briar knew something was wrong the moment she saw Sable Cross sitting in her chair. Not near it, not beside it, in it. The Grakian ballroom glowed with candlelight, silver trays, and soft music, but the beauty felt staged, like a smile hiding a knife. The private investor dinner had turned into what Marable called a family legacy reception. It was not large enough to be public, but it was crowded enough to wound. Board members lingered near the fireplace. Staff moved quietly along the walls. Drayton Pell stood with a glass in his hand. Kea Voss watched the room like a man waiting for bad news. Nolan Rusk kept a leather folder tucked under one arm, and beside Callum, in the seat Briar had occupied for 12 years, sat Sable. A small white place card stood before her, Sable Cross. Briar's own card had been moved to a narrow side table near the service entrance. For one breath, no one spoke. Then Sable looked up with a soft smile. "I hope this isn't awkward." Marable said the seating should reflect the future. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Mara lowered her eyes. Orin stood near the doorway, his face tight with anger he could not show. Marable smiled as if she had arranged flowers instead of humiliation. Some women preserve a family line. Others merely pass through its hallways. The words floated across the ballroom, elegant and cruel. Briar looked at Callum. He did not move. He did not correct his mother. He did not tell Sable to stand. He only leaned back in his chair and said, "Don't make a scene." Briar's throat tightened, but her voice stayed quiet. "I did not move the chair." That simple sentence made the room colder. Callum's jaw hardened. Sable lowered her lashes like she was trying not to enjoy it. Marable's fingers rested on the back of Callum's chair, claiming both her son and the room. Drayton lifted his glass, pretending the moment was harmless. "To necessary changes." Kea hesitated, then drank. Nolan watched Briar without blinking, like a man waiting for grief to become paperwork. Sable touched Callum's wrist. "You deserve peace, Callum." "Peace?" Briar almost laughed. For 12 years, she had been the one making peace. She softened Marable's insults before guests noticed. She covered staff shortages before vendors complained. She reviewed investor notes Callum was too proud to study. She caught the mistakes, carried the shame, and let him stand under chandeliers pretending leadership came naturally to him. Now he wanted peace from the woman who had been holding his chaos together. The reception continued around her, but Briar no longer tasted the air the same way. Every laugh sounded arranged. Every glance felt rehearsed. Sable was not just a secret lover. She had been invited into the strategy. Marable had not merely accepted the affair, she had dressed it, seated it, and served it with wine. When the last investor left the ballroom, Nolan placed his leather folder on the marble entry table. Callum held a sealed courier packet in his right hand, the white edge pressed against his dark suit like he had rehearsed the moment. Briar saw the legal stamp before she saw the words. Divorce papers, not a threat, a decision already made. The sound was small, it still silenced everyone. "Mrs. Vane," Nolan said, "the trustees of Grakian Estate have determined that your continued presence creates domestic instability." Briar stared at him. "Domestic instability?" Marable reached for a silver tray near the staircase. Briar's keys were already there, separated from Callum's. Callum stood beside his mother, hands in his pockets. "You need to leave tonight." For a moment, Briar did not recognize him. Not because his face had changed, but because it had not. He looked calm, practiced, almost relieved. 12 years, she said, and you chose an audience. Callum's eyes flicked towards Sable, then away. You chose to become difficult. The blame landed exactly where they meant it to land. Nolan opened the folder. Grakian Estate is held by the Vane Residential Trust. Mrs. Marable Vane is the controlling trustee. Your residence here was permissive as Callum's spouse. Since divorce proceedings have been filed and the trustees claim your presence disrupts estate operations, they are instructing you to leave tonight while council resolves access to personal belongings. It was cold language, legal language, the kind used to make cruelty sound clean. Briar understood the trick. They believed the estate trust gave them power. They believed removing her before the divorce would weaken her. They believed possession of the house meant possession of the story. Nolan continued, "Formal divorce documents will be served tomorrow morning." Marable corrected him smoothly. "They were filed this afternoon." Briar turned to Callum. He looked at the floor. That was the answer. Mara stepped forward when Marable ordered the staff to pack Briar's things. "No," Mara said softly. Marable's face sharpened. "Excuse me." Mara lifted her chin, though her hands trembled. "Mrs. Vane can pack for herself. She has given this house more dignity than this room is giving her." No one moved. Then Briar touched Mara's arm. It's all right. But it was not all right. She walked upstairs alone. The bedroom door stood open. Inside, the betrayal had already settled in like a new owner. Sable's amber perfume sat on the vanity. Some of Briar's dresses had been pushed into garment bags. Her jewelry drawer was half open. On the nightstand sat the wedding photo from years ago, Callum smiling at her as if he had once known how to love without measuring advantage. A memory rose before she could stop it. Their wedding night. Callum holding her hand under the balcony lights, his voice soft as he said, "I do not care what you own, I just want you." Back then she had believed it was devotion. Now she understood. He had not cared what she owned because he had assumed it was nothing. Briar packed one suitcase. Her father's fountain pen. The private trustee envelope. A small notebook of estate expenses. A photo of her father, one dark coat. Copies of old relief payments that showed her personal funds had repeatedly covered holes Callum denied existed. She left the wedding photo face down on the vanity. When she returned to the entry hall, Marable held out her hand. The keys. Briar placed them in her palm. Sable descended the staircase, wearing Briar's pearls. "Some women are only allowed inside a family until the real future arrives," Sable said softly. Then her smile widened. "Don't worry, I'll take care of the house." Briar looked at her, then at the walls, the portraits, the chandelier, the polished floors hiding years of unpaid repairs. "That house has survived worse caretakers than you." Callum stepped forward. "Sign the divorce settlement, Briar. Don't fight people bigger than you." Her eyes were wet now, but her voice did not break. "You were never bigger than me, Callum. You were only louder." Callum frowned, not understanding. Kea did. His face changed. At the door, Oren stepped close as if helping Briar with her suitcase. His hand brushed her coat pocket. "West Archive," he whispered. "I copied what they forgot to burn." A brass key slipped into her pocket. Briar did not look at him. She only gave the smallest nod. Then the doors opened and rain swallowed her. She walked down the stone steps with one suitcase, while Grakian glowed behind her like a house proud of its own cruelty. At the gate, her phone buzzed. The first message was a photo, Callum and Sable kissing in Briar's bedroom. The second message arrived before she could breathe. "Leora Penn, Astafall Bank, Chairwoman Vale, Vane Meridian has requested emergency refinancing. Given the conflict, we need your written authorization to convene an independent executive risk review and outside counsel." Briar looked back at the estate. Then she looked at the message. For the first time that night, the rain stopped. And somewhere behind those glowing windows, the people celebrating her removal had no idea they had just handed her the key to everything. The divorce papers arrived before Briar's coat had dried. She was standing barefoot in a small hotel room when the knock came. Her suitcase lay open on the floor. Her dark coat hung over the back of a chair, still dripping rainwater onto the thin carpet. Her father's photo sat on the nightstand beside the fountain pen she had carried out of Grakian estate like a weapon no one had recognized. For a few seconds, Briar did not move. The knock came again. At the door stood a private process server holding a thick envelope with a courier sticker across the front. Beside him, a nervous hotel clerk waited with an apology in his eyes. "Mrs. Vane?" the process server asked. Briar signed for it. The moment the door closed, she opened the envelope on the small desk. The first page said, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Her breath caught, but she did not cry, not yet. She turned the pages slowly. The settlement was written in polite legal language, but every line was designed to erase her. Briar was to waive all claims connected to Vane Meridian Holdings. She was to waive any claim involving Grakian estate. She was not to contact staff. She was to sign a strict confidentiality agreement. She was not to request company financial records. She was to accept a small transitional payment and disappear quietly. Then one sentence stopped her cold. Wife acknowledges that she holds no direct or indirect interest in any lender connected to husband's business obligations and waives all right to request, review, or challenge records related to such obligations. Briar read it twice. Then a third time. Her hand moved to her father's pen. Why would they mention lender interest unless someone feared the lender? The room felt smaller. Yesterday, Grakian had surrounded her with marble floors and high ceilings. Today she had one suitcase, one bed, and divorce papers meant to make her look powerless. But the mansion had never been her power. The bank was. Briar picked up her phone and called the one person her father had once told her to trust if love ever turned into law. Tamsin Lark, 49, was a divorce attorney and private litigation strategist who had once handled sensitive matters for Briar's father. She was known for speaking softly and leaving no document unexamined. Tamsin arrived less than an hour later, wearing a dark coat and carrying a leather file. She did not ask Briar if she was all right. That would have been too small a question for what had happened. Instead, she sat at the desk, read the settlement twice, and placed one finger on the lender clause. "This is not a divorce agreement," Tamsin said. "This is a crime scene with margins." Briar sat across from her. "They want me gone before I know what to ask for. Then we ask for everything." The words steadied something inside Briar. For the first time since the estate doors closed behind her, she felt the floor return under her feet. Tamsin took out a legal pad. "Before we respond, I need full disclosure from you. Assets, trusts, accounts, anything connected to Callum's company or its lenders. If they are setting a trap, we need to know which wire they expect you to step over." Briar looked at her father's pen. Then she opened her secure tablet. The screen glowed in the dim hotel room. Astafall Bank and Trust, Chairwoman B. Vale. Tamsin went completely still. "Briar," she said carefully, "does Callum know?" Briar's face did not change, but her voice softened. "He knows my father founded Astafall. He thinks the controlling interest was sold after my father died." "Was it?" "No." Briar looked at the screen. "It was protected from people exactly like him." She explained what Callum had never bothered to understand. Astafall Bank was held through Vale Lantern Trust, not under her married name. The trust existed before the marriage. The premarital disclosure listed it. Callum had signed the paperwork because he thought the trust held old family assets and charitable interests, not control of a bank. Board files used her maiden name. She had stayed away from direct decisions involving Vane Meridian because she wanted a clean line between marriage and money. Tamsin listened without interrupting. Then she said that lender clause was not random. "No," Briar said. "It was fear wearing a suit." Tamsin's eyes sharpened. "Then we do this properly." Briar called Leora Penn and requested Astafall's legal counsel to join the secure line. Within minutes, Leora's calm voice filled the room, joined by a bank attorney from the compliance department. Briar spoke before anyone else could. "I am still legally married to Callum Vane," she said. "I will not personally punish him through the bank. I will not vote on his credit review, document everything, convene compliance, risk, independent directors, and outside counsel. If Vane Meridian is in default, the decision must come from the record, not from my anger." There was a pause. Then Leora said, "Understood, Chairwoman. We will treat this as a conflict-screened borrower review." Tamsin gave Briar one brief look of approval. Quiet revenge had to be clean. Otherwise, Callum would turn himself into a victim and call the truth emotional. After the call ended, Briar stared at the rainwater dripping from her coat. A memory came back. Years earlier, during the first year of their marriage, she had almost told Callum the full truth. They had been at a dinner, seated beside a wealthy widow who owned several companies. After the woman left the table, Callum laughed and said, "Women with money always think they can buy respect." Briar had been holding her wineglass, ready to tell him about Astafall. She never did, because something in his voice told her he would not admire her power. He would either resent it or try to use it. Now she knew silence had not protected her marriage. It had only delayed the day Callum revealed what he loved when he thought she had nothing. By late afternoon, Tamsin arranged a preliminary meeting in a rented conference room. Nolan arrived first, carrying another folder. Callum came in behind him, dressed like a man attending a business negotiation instead of facing the wife he had thrown into the rain. Marable followed, cold and perfect. Sable came last, wearing Briar's pearls. The sight struck harder than Briar expected, not because of the pearls, because Sable wore them like proof that cruelty could inherit a room. Marable sat without greeting her. "Sign today, and we might allow you to collect the rest of your clothes." Callum slid a pen across the table. "Be realistic, Briar, you have no army." Briar looked at the pen, then she removed her father's fountain pen from her bag and placed it beside the settlement. "I have counsel." Tamsin pushed the papers back toward Nolan. "My client refuses." Sable gave a small laugh. "You refuse what?" "Charity." Briar finally looked at her. "No, a gag." The room went quiet. Tamsin leaned forward. "Before we end, I have one question. Why does your proposed settlement mention lender institutions?" Kaya, who had entered quietly as Callum's financial representative, went pale near the wall. Nolan answered too quickly, "Standard language." Briar turned her eyes toward Kaya, then back to Nolan. "Then you won't mind if we request loan records during discovery?" Callum slammed his hand on the table. "You are not dragging my company into this." Tamsin smiled. "You already did." Briar said nothing, but her fingers closed around her father's pen, and for the first time the people across the table began to understand that the woman they had thrown out had not come there to beg. She had come to read. By sunrise, Briar's marriage had become a legal file. Her hotel room was no longer just a place to sleep. It had turned into a war room. Divorce papers covered the small desk. Her father's fountain pen lay beside a stack of fresh legal notices. Her suitcase was still open on the floor, but Briar had stopped looking at it. There was no time to mourn the clothes left behind at Grakian. Callum had wanted her erased. Tamsin was making sure every erasure attempt became evidence. Across from Briar, Tamsin placed a legal notice on top of the pile and tapped it once. "This goes out first." Briar read the heading. "Notice to preserve records." Tamsin's voice was calm, but there was steel inside it. "Company records, estate trust communications, loan applications, marital financial statements, household account statements, any messages involving Sable Cross, any documents connected to spousal waivers, any communications about your removal from Grakian. If they delete anything after receiving this, it becomes another problem for them." Briar looked at the list. Each line felt like a door opening into a room Callum had tried to lock. Tamsin continued, "They wanted you out before you could ask questions, so we ask before they can clean the answers." Briar nodded, but her hand closed around her father's pen. Only 24 hours earlier, she had been standing in the ballroom while Sable sat in her chair. Now the humiliation had a paper trail. The moved seat, the pearls, the divorce clause, the lender language, the sudden refinancing request, none of it stood alone anymore. It was starting to connect. At Astafall Bank and Trust, Leora stood in the risk department with a team of auditors around a long conference table. The room was bright, clean, and colder than the hotel. Screens displayed the Vane Meridian loan file. Printed schedules lay in neat piles. The name Vane Meridian Holdings appeared again and again like a warning that had been ignored too many times. Dax Rowan, 36, a senior commercial loan auditor at Astafall Bank, pointed to a column on the screen. They requested emergency renewals 3 times in 18 months. Each time, they submitted partial documents and promised updated collateral support later. Leora's eyes narrowed. "Show the collateral schedule." Another auditor pulled it up. There it was, the West Gallery paintings. The same group of estate art, listed once in an earlier credit package, then again in a later renewal with a higher value and a different appraisal date. Leora leaned closer. "Inflated and possibly double-pledged," she said. Dax moved to the next tab. "Loan purpose says market expansion, but these outgoing payments do not look like expansion." The screen showed expenses coded under business categories: luxury wardrobe, private travel, residence styling, jewelry invoices. One line caught Leora's attention: SK Residence Styling Brand Environment. Leora did not react emotionally. She only said, "Flag every payment connected to those initials, pull invoices, approvals, and who authorized them." Another file opened. A board approval form appeared on the screen. Dax pointed at 3 signatures. "These look copied from prior approvals, same slant, same spacing, even the pen lift looks identical." Leora looked at the memo attached beneath them. "Request, avoid spousal review until renewal is complete." Voss, the room went quiet. Leora straightened. "Treat this like a borrower risk case, not a family drama. Every conclusion needs a document under it." That was what made Briar dangerous now. Not anger, not tears, documents. At Grakian Estate, the West Archive smelled of dust, old paper, and secrets. Orin unlocked the narrow door with the brass key he had slipped into Briar's coat. Behind him, Mara carried her phone, a flashlight, and a cloth bag. They both knew they could lose their jobs if Marable caught them. Still, Mara stepped inside first. "She told the staff this room was being cleared today," Mara whispered. "Then we photograph faster than she clears," Orin said. The archive was small and windowless, stacked with estate ledgers, old payroll books, repair invoices, insurance schedules, and trust correspondence. Orin went straight to a metal cabinet in the corner. "Is Briar always asked for these records after winter?" he said softly. "Never for herself, always to see who had been paid late." Mara opened a ledger and covered her mouth. There were payroll gaps marked in red. Next to them in Briar's handwriting were notes, covered through private relief account. "Do not embarrass staff." Mara's eyes filled. "She did this more times than they thanked her for," Orin said. "They photographed everything." Then Mara found a folder labeled Campaign Hospitality. Inside were receipts for an apartment redesign, designer clothing, spa services, and a luxury travel company. Several invoices had initials written in the corner. SK1 jewelry invoice had been coded as client hospitality samples. Mara's face hardened. They used company money for that woman. Oren turned another page and went still. A handwritten note from Marable lay clipped to a renewal file. Do not let Briar see this. The words were short, but they carried years of intention. Back in the hotel room, Briar opened the first batch of scanned documents from Oren and Mara. Tamsin stood behind her, reading silently. The old payroll notes appeared first. Briar did not expect them to hurt, but they did. A memory rose with each page. One winter, an estate worker's child needed medical travel money, and Briar had covered the staff bonuses early so no one would have to ask Marable for help. Another year, Vane Meridian's payroll nearly failed before Christmas, and Briar moved money through a private family relief account so the employees would not suffer for Callum's pride. Once, she had begged Callum to sell unused luxury cars to reduce pressure on the company, and he had laughed. You think like a clerk, he had told her. Another memory came sharper. Marable in the hospital years ago. Briar sitting outside the room all night, speaking with doctors, sending updates, making sure the nurses had everything they needed. A week later, Marable told guests. Briar stood around uselessly as usual. Briar closed her eyes. She had not been weak. She had been protective, and they had built their cruelty inside the shelter she gave them. Tamsin's phone buzzed with another message. Not discovery yet, she said, reading carefully. A lead. We will authenticate it before we use it. Briar opened the attachment. There were screenshots of messages between Callum and Sable from the night before the expulsion. Briar opened the file. There were messages between Callum and Sable from the night before the expulsion. Callum, after the estate removal she'll panic. She has no one. Sable, good. Let her feel what it means to be replaceable. Briar stared at the screen. That was the line that broke her. Not the affair, not the pearls, not even the chair. It was the fact that Callum believed she had no one after 12 years of giving him everything. Her tears came silently. She turned her face away, but Tamsin did not rush her. Some pain had to be witnessed without being interrupted. Across town, Kea called Nolan from his office with the door locked. If Astafall audits the original collateral schedule, we're finished, Kea said. Nolan's voice was cold. Then hope Briar signs before they do. Kea looked at the renewal folder on his desk. You don't understand, the bank review is already moving. In the hotel room, Briar wiped her face and returned to the documents. Her phone rang. Leora. Briar answered on the first ring. Leora's voice was controlled but tighter than before. We found something worse than default. Briar gripped the phone. What? A personal guarantee renewal includes your name. The room seemed to tilt. Briar stood slowly. I never signed a guarantee. Leora paused. That is exactly the problem. Briar looked at her father's fountain pen on the desk, and for the first time, she understood that they had not only tried to remove her from the house. They may have tried to put her name inside their debt. Continuing from your uploaded script, here are the revised scenes 610 with stronger realism, cleaner cause and effect, and full payoff delivery. Briar knew the signature was false before anyone explained it. It sat on the bottom of the loan renewal package, neat and confident, pretending to be hers. The name looked close enough to fool someone who had never watched her write it. But Briar had lived with her own name longer than any of them had lived with their lies. The document lay on the glass table inside Astafall Bank's private review room. Around it were printed loan files, red tabs, scanned checks, expense charts, and signature comparisons. The room was cold, bright, and silent in the way only serious rooms became silent. Leora Penn stood near the screen with a folder in her hand. Beside her was Eamon Greer, 56, Astafall's senior compliance counsel, and the bank attorney assigned to protect the institution during high-risk borrower investigations. Next to him sat Vader Rill, 61, an independent handwriting expert hired by Astafall and outside counsel to review the questioned documents without influence from Briar, Callum, or the bank's internal politics. Vader adjusted her glasses and pointed to the signature. At first glance, it imitates your hand well, Vader said, but the pressure is wrong, the slant is forced. And this crossing here, the T, Briar said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Briar leaned closer. My father taught me to cross the T in veil upward, always upward. This one crosses downward. Vader nodded. Exactly, that difference alone is not final proof, but combined with the pressure pattern, hesitation marks, and copied letter spacing, it strongly suggests simulation. Briar's face did not move, but something inside her went still. The document was a spousal acknowledgement. It claimed Briar had known that marital reputation, household assets, and estate-related guarantees were being used to support Vane Meridian's debt position. It claimed she had been informed. It claimed she had consented. She had done neither. "My father used to say," Briar said, "a forged name always knows how to look like you, but not how to remember you." For a moment, the room disappeared. She was young again, sitting beside Arlen Vale at a training desk inside Astafall after closing. Her father placed a pen in her hand and slid a form toward her. "Your signature is not decoration, Briar," he told her. "It is your consent. Guard it like a door." Back then, she had smiled because she thought he was being dramatic. Now, years later, she understood. Callum's world had not only thrown her out of the estate. It had tried to open a door with her name. Tamsin Lark stood beside Briar and read the page again. Her voice was low. "This moves us beyond marital misconduct." Eamon nodded. "If the borough submitted this knowingly, the bank has a serious fraud concern. If someone inside the borough's office prepared it, signed it, or allowed it into the package, that becomes part of the legal referral." Briar looked at the copied signature one more time. "Then document it properly. No anger, no shouting. Only instruction." Leora changed the screen. "There is more." A new chart appeared, showing expenses charged through Vane Meridian accounts. The names were hidden behind business categories, but the pattern was not hard to see. A luxury apartment had been listed as a client hospitality suite. Designer clothes had been coded as brand campaign wardrobe. Spa retreats had been labeled executive wellness. Private flights had been charged under regional market visits. Jewelry, including pearls, had been entered as investor gift samples. Then Leora opened the supporting invoices. Several were connected to Sable Cross. Tamsin's jaw tightened. "She was not just sleeping with your husband. She was spending borrowed money your bank provided." Briar looked at the line for the pearls. The same pearls Sable had worn at Grakian. The same pearls she had worn while telling Briar she would take care of the house. For the first time that day, Briar's eyes changed. Not with rage. With disgust. At Grakian Estate, Marable had gathered the others in the library as if she were leading a war council. Callum stood near the fireplace, restless and pale. Sable sat beside him with her phone in her hand. Nolan had papers spread across the desk. Drayton paced near the windows. Kea stood near the door, looking like a man already measuring the distance between himself and prison. Marable's voice cut through the room. "The bank wants documents. The wife wants revenge. We need to make them both look emotional." Sable nodded quickly. "Make Briar look bitter, dependent, unstable. People believe abandoned wives are irrational." Drayton smirked. "I can speak to a few investors, say Callum is being targeted by a jealous spouse." Nolan raised one hand. "Careful, say nothing that can be called defamation. We need implication, not accusation." Kea's voice came from the doorway. "You are not hearing me. If Astafall freezes the credit line, Vane Meridian cannot survive 30 days. Callum snapped. "They won't. Banks negotiate." "Not when fraud is involved," Kea said. The word hung in the room. Marable slammed her palm on the table. "Then make sure fraud is not involved." No one answered, because everyone knew it already was. By that evening, Sable's strategy had begun. Through company-controlled channels, she helped push soft, careful statements about removing toxic influences from legacy spaces and protecting a family business from personal bitterness. Briar saw the posts. She did not respond. Tamsin read them beside her and smiled without warmth. "Let them talk. Every sentence they publish becomes motive." Briar set the phone down. Once she would have wanted Callum to defend her. Once she would have hoped Marable would feel shame. Once she might have explained herself until her voice broke. Now she understood something her father had tried to teach her. A truthful record did not need volume. It only needed time. Back at Astafall, Briar reviewed the evidence with Leora, Tamsin, Eamon and Vader. The forged acknowledgement, the inflated collateral, the duplicate estate art values, the expenses tied to Sable, the memo from Kea asking that spousal review be avoided. Everything that had hurt her was becoming something sharper. Evidence. Briar turned to Leora. If the borrower violated loan covenants, submitted a questioned spousal document, misused funds, and inflated collateral, what would Astafall do for any other borrower? Leora did not hesitate. Freeze discretionary credit. Convene emergency executive review. Notify legal. Demand cure. If cure is impossible, call default and refer suspected fraud. Briar looked down at her father's pen. "Then we do that." Tamsin studied her. "You understand what happens after that?" Briar nodded. "Yes. Callum will say you destroyed him." Briar's voice stayed quiet. "No, I stopped protecting him from himself." The next morning, Tamsin received a court filing from Nolan. Callum accused Briar of financial abandonment. He claimed she had contributed nothing to the marriage, nothing to the company, and nothing to Grakian. Attached was a sworn statement from Sable. Sable wrote that Briar was emotionally unstable, uninvolved in Callum's business life, and jealous of women who had real public value. Briar read every word. Then she opened the small notebook she had carried out of the estate. 12 years of notes filled the pages, every payroll gap, every vendor payment, every emergency loan conversation, every date Callum forgot and Briar fixed. She looked at Tamsin and closed the notebook softly. She should not have put that in writing. And somewhere inside those pages, the quiet wife they called useless had already begun answering under oath. Callum walked into the mediation room with Sable on his arm like she was already his victory. Briar saw them through the glass wall before they saw her. Callum wore a dark suit and the same proud expression he used in investor photos. Marable walked beside him, cold and upright. Nolan carried his leather folder. Drayton followed with a small smile, as if the room had been prepared for Briar's surrender. And Sable came in wearing Briar's pearls again. She was not required to be there. She had no legal reason to sit inside a divorce mediation between husband and wife. Holly's Wren looked toward Tamsin. Ms. Cross is not a party. Do you object to her remaining? Tamsin glanced at Briar, then back at the mediator. No objection. If they want their witness in the room, we will let her speak. But Callum brought her anyway, because he still believed shame could make Briar smaller. Tamsin stood beside Briar at the conference table and lowered her voice. Remember the plan. Briar did not look away from the glass. Let them talk. Not just talk, Tamsin said. Let them deny. Briar turned to her. Tamsin opened a folder and placed 3 tabs in front of her. We need them to deny 3 things on record: your contribution, their knowledge of the debt structure, and the misuse of company money. Briar's fingers rested on her father's fountain pen. Why? Because once they lie officially, Tamsin said, the truth does not have to shout. That sentence settled over Briar like armor. A few minutes later, they all sat across from each other under flat white lights. Between them was a long table, 2 pitchers of water, and a stack of documents thick enough to bury a marriage. At the head of the room sat Holly's Wren, 59, a retired family court mediator assigned to guide the divorce meeting and record settlement positions before the case moved deeper into litigation. He looked tired before anyone spoke. Callum leaned back in his chair. Briar, this is embarrassing. You were a wife, not a partner. Sable smiled softly. Some women confuse proximity to success with building it. Briar looked at her but said nothing. That silence irritated Sable more than any insult would have. Tamsin clicked her pen once. Mr. Vane, did my client ever contribute personal or private resources to support Grakian Estate, its staff, or Vane Meridian Holdings during cash shortages? Callum laughed. No. Tamsin wrote it down. She turned to Marable. Mrs. Vane, same question. Marable lifted her chin. Briar contributed atmosphere, nothing more. Tamsin wrote that down too. Then she looked at Sable. Ms. Cross, were company funds ever used for your personal expenses, including housing, clothing, travel, styling, jewelry, or private hospitality? Sable's smile sharpened. Absolutely not. Tamsin wrote the words slowly. Briar watched the pen move. Every answer was a door closing behind them. Nolan frowned. This line of questioning is irrelevant. Tamsin did not look up. Then it should not worry you. Callum leaned forward. You are trying to turn a divorce into a business attack. No, Tamsin said. Your settlement did that when it tried to block my client from financial records. Holly's cleared his throat. Let us keep the tone productive. But the room had already changed. Callum still thought he was winning because Briar was quiet. He did not understand that her silence was no longer fear. It was storage. Across town, Asterfall Bank's board suite was being prepared for an emergency executive meeting. Files were placed at each chair. Digital screens were tested. Loan summaries were printed with red tabs marking default risk, collateral concerns, and suspected fraud. Junior Valles, 44, the board secretary at Asterfall Bank and the official responsible for executive meeting records, checked the agenda twice before handing it to Leora. Will Chairwoman Vale attend in person? Junior asked. Leora looked at the first agenda line. Vane Meridian Holdings, Emergency Credit Exposure Review, then the next, questioned spousal acknowledgement bearing Chairwoman's name. She has to, Leora said. They used her name, but the independent committee will make the credit decision. The agenda was cold and exact. Vane Meridian default status, fraud concerns, questioned spousal acknowledgement, collateral overvaluation. Misuse of loan proceeds, immediate risk to bank exposure, recommendation to freeze discretionary credit and refer matters for legal review. Nothing on the page said revenge. That was what made it powerful. Back at the mediation room, Tamsin introduced sworn statements from Oren and Mara. Callum's expression darkened when he saw their names. Oren confirmed that Briar had privately covered estate staff hardships during several cash shortages and that estate documents had been removed from the West Archive before the bank review. Mara confirmed that Sable had entered Briar's bedroom before the expulsion and that Briar's belongings had been moved before she was told to leave. Attached were photographs of ledgers, receipts, and handwritten notes. Marable's face tightened. Sable looked down at the table. Callum said staff gossip is not evidence. Tamsin slid one photograph forward. Receipts are. For the first time, Callum did not answer immediately. That night, Graykin Estate looked bright from the outside, but inside the rooms felt nervous. Marable gathered Callum, Sable, Kea, Nolan, and Drayton in the library. She is cornered, Marable said. Once the settlement is signed, we announce Sable properly and move forward. Sable adjusted the pearls at her throat. And the business. Marable waved one hand. Men always find money. Kea, standing near the fireplace, muttered, not from banks they defrauded. The room went still. Marable's eyes cut to him. You are becoming tiresome. Kea looked at Callum. If Astafall freezes the credit line, payroll fails, vendors sue, investors run, there is no hidden rescue left. Callum's voice rose. Banks negotiate. Kea answered quietly, not when they think the borrower forged documents. No one spoke after that. In her hotel room, Briar sat alone with her father's pen and the divorce papers spread before her. The anger had faded into something heavier. Memory. She saw her father's funeral again, rain on black umbrellas. Callum beside her holding her hand. He had leaned close and whispered, you will never have to face anything alone. Briar looked at the empty chair across from her. You were the loneliest promise I ever believed, she said. Her phone rang near midnight. Leora, Briar answered. The emergency executive meeting is set for tomorrow, Leora said. Briar's hand closed around the pen. Will Callum be there? He requested to attend with his CFO and counsel. He thinks he can negotiate. Briar looked at the dark window. Somewhere beyond it, Callum was still standing inside a house he believed made him powerful. Good, she said, and as she placed her father's pen beside the evidence folder, Briar understood that tomorrow, Callum would not be negotiating with a bank. He would be sitting across from the woman he thought he had erased. Callum Vane walked into Astafall Bank like he still owned the room. He did not. The executive boardroom sat behind glass walls on the highest private floor of Astafall Bank and Trust. Cold morning light poured across the long, polished table. Nameplates waited in front of every chair. Thick binders sat in perfect stacks. On the wall screens, the words Vane Meridian Holdings, Emergency Credit Exposure Review glowed in sharp black letters. Callum entered first, buttoning his suit jacket with a practiced smile. Marable followed in a dark dress and pearls, looking less like a mother and more like a judge arriving to sentence someone else. Sable stayed close to Callum, her hand near his arm, her face arranged into soft confidence. Nolan carried settlement papers as if the bank meeting was only another negotiation. Drayton looked uncomfortable for the first time since Briar had known him. Kea came last. His face was pale. Quiet security stood near the door. They said nothing, but their presence made the room feel less like a meeting and more like a line no one could cross once the truth began. Callum leaned towards Sable and whispered, bank people always blink when legacy clients push back. Sable smiled without looking at the binders. Then make them blink. Marable adjusted one pearl earring. Remember, Callum, the Vane name still opens doors. Then the door opened. Briar walked in. The room changed before she spoke. Every Astafall executive stood. Leora Penn looked at her with formal respect and said, Good morning, Chairwoman Vale. Callum turned slowly. The smile left his face first. Then the color. Sable's hand fell from his sleeve. Marable stared at Briar as if she had watched a servant sit on a throne. Drayton's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Kea closed his eyes like a man who had been waiting for the explosion and still feared the sound. Callum finally spoke. Briar, what is this? Briar did not answer like a wife. She walked to the head of the table and sat down. Leora spoke for the record. Chairwoman Briar Vale is the controlling beneficiary of Vale Lantern Trust, majority owner of Astafall Bank and Trust. Because documents submitted by the borrower bear her name, her presence is required for identity confirmation and conflict disclosure. The credit decision will be led by the Independent Review Committee, Compliance and Outside Counsel. A man beside Leora opened a binder. Rowan Quad, 58, outside banking counsel hired by Astafall to oversee high-risk credit and fraud reviews, gave a short nod to the room. "This is not a marital proceeding," Rowan said. "This is a borrow risk review." The words landed hard. Callum looked at Briar again, but she kept her eyes on the files. For years, he had looked past her, in investor rooms, in dining halls. In the estate corridors, he had treated her silence like emptiness. Now that same silence sat at the head of the table, surrounded by records he could not charm. Leora began. "Vane Meridian Holdings is in covenant breach." The first screen changed. Emergency renewals were requested multiple times without full supporting documents. Collateral values tied to Graykian estate appear overstated. Certain estate assets may have been pledged in more than one credit package. Marable stiffened. Rowan turned a page. Board approvals contain irregular signatures. A spousal acknowledgement bearing Briar Vale's name appears forged. That document represented consent and awareness that she denies giving. Callum swallowed. "This is ridiculous." Tamsin sat beside Briar, calm and still. "Then the signature review should comfort you." It did not. Leora moved to the next screen. Loan proceeds were used for unauthorized personal expenses. A chart appeared. SK Residence Styling. SK Travel Wardrobe. Private Suite, coded as Client Hospitality. Pearl Invoice, coded as Investor Sample. Sable whispered, "That is not what it looks like." Tamsin answered quietly, "It rarely is. That is why records help." Sable said nothing after that. Briar looked at the Pearl Invoice and remembered the staircase at Graykian. Sable wearing those pearls like a crown. Marable holding the keys. Callum telling her not to fight people bigger than her. The memory hurt, but it no longer ruled her. Pain had brought her to the door. Evidence had brought her to the chair. Rowan continued. Marable Vane participated in collateral representations connected to estate assets. Kea Voss submitted renewal documents with material omissions. We also have a memo requesting that spousal review be avoided until renewal completion. All eyes turned to Kea. He stared at the table. Nolan shifted in his seat. "This bank has a long relationship with the Vane family. Surely we can discuss a cure period." Leora's voice stayed even. "That depends on whether the breaches are curable and whether the documents were submitted in good faith." Callum leaned toward Briar. His voice dropped softer now, almost wounded. "Briar, this is our marriage. Don't do this in front of strangers." Briar finally looked at him. "You filed our divorce in front of your mistress." The room went silent. Callum looked away first. Marable's mask cracked. "You hid who you were. You deceived this family." Briar turned to her. "No, I gave this family 12 years to show me who it was before it knew what I owned." For the first time, Marable had no quick insult. Leora read the recommended actions. Astafall will freeze all discretionary credit access pending further review. Emergency refinancing is declined. Immediate cure will be demanded on defaulted obligations. Question documents will be referred for legal review. Insurers and affected parties will be notified where required. Recovery proceedings will begin on pledged collateral if cure is not made. Estate-backed facilities will be placed under default review. Callum pushed back from the table. "You can't. If you freeze us, we collapse." Briar's voice was quiet. "Then you were already collapsing." Leora placed one document before Briar. It was not an order of personal revenge. It was an acknowledgement that the independent committee could proceed according to policy and that Briar had disclosed her conflict on the record. Briar read it carefully. Then she picked up her father's fountain pen. Callum watched her hand. "Briar," he said, "you ruined me." She signed, then she looked at him. "No, Callum, I stopped lending silence to your ruin." The room remained still for one breath. Then Kea stood. "I want counsel." Nolan turned sharply. "Sit down." Callum snapped. "Kea, don't be stupid." Kea looked at Briar, then at the binders, then at Marable. "I will cooperate." Marable's voice dropped to a whisper. "Coward." Kea answered, "No, Marable, borrowers can be bankrupt. I don't intend to be imprisoned for your pride." And as Junior began writing his words into the official record, Callum finally understood that the meeting had not ended with Briar's signature. It had only opened the first door. The first payroll failure happened 48 hours after Briar signed the conflict disclosure and Astafall froze the discretionary credit line. At Vane Meridian Holdings, the accounting department froze in front of their screens. Red warnings flashed across the payroll system. Vendor payments bounced. The operating line from Astafall Bank had been locked. No emergency draw could be made. No quiet transfer could save the morning. For the first time, Callum Vane's company had to stand without the borrowed air it had been breathing. Callum stormed through the finance floor, tie loose, face pale with anger. Fix it, no one answered. Kea stood near the conference room door with a lawyer beside him. He no longer looked like Callum's frightened servant. He looked like a man who had decided which sinking ship he would not die on. Callum pointed at him. You did this. Kea's voice stayed flat. No, Callum, the documents did this. Employees watched from behind glass walls. Some looked scared. Some looked betrayed. Most looked like people who had finally learned the elegant company they worked for had been held together with lies, debt, and one woman's silence. By noon, vendors were calling. By evening, investors were demanding answers. By the next morning, a second lender issued a cross-default notice after learning Astafall had frozen credit and opened a fraud review. That was when the collapse stopped being private. The next day, Drayton Pell met Callum in a private corridor outside a social club where Callum used to walk like a prince. Drayton's smile was gone. No one knew the bank ownership issue, he said quickly. You understand that, Callum? We were all misled. Callum stared at him. You drank to necessary changes. Drayton looked away. That was social, not legal. Callum laughed once, bitter and empty. So now you were just a guest. I was never part of your paperwork, Drayton said. That was how fast loyalty died when subpoenas arrived. Sable tried to disappear more quietly. She packed 2 designer bags from the apartment Vane Meridian had paid for and called a car before sunrise. But Tamsin had already issued subpoenas for records connected to her benefits, and Astafall's legal referral had identified the same transactions. The apartment lease, wardrobe invoices, private travel, styling expenses, and jewelry purchases were all tied back to company accounts. By afternoon, Sable was sitting in a lawyer's office, no pearls around her neck. A court notice required her to preserve and return company-funded property, including the pearls she had worn in Briar's house. Corvin Hale, 46, an investor representative hired by several Vane Meridian minority investors to review misuse of company funds, asked her one question across a conference table. Did you knowingly accept benefits that were misclassified as business expenses? Sable's lips parted. I was told everything was approved. Corvin leaned forward. Approved by whom? Sable looked toward Callum's attorney, and in that one glance her loyalty ended. At Graykian Estate, Marable tried to pretend the walls still obeyed her, but the notices came in white envelopes and official hands. After Astafall filed an emergency motion to protect estate-backed collateral, the court granted limited receivership over the pledged Graykian assets. A court-appointed receiver arrived with 2 assistants and a stack of documents. His name was Aldrin Pike, 63, the court-appointed receiver assigned to protect and manage estate-related collateral during the bank recovery process. He posted the first notice on the front door. Marable came down the staircase like thunder in pearls. Remove that, she ordered Orin. Orin looked at the paper, then at her. His voice was gentle. I do not take orders that belong to the receiver now. Marable's face went white. The woman who had taken Briar's keys now stood helpless while strangers controlled the doors. Aldrin spoke politely. Mrs. Vane, all estate-backed assets under review must remain accessible. Any removal of property may be treated as interference. Marable gripped the banister. For years, she had believed Graykian made her untouchable. Now the estate had become collateral with curtains. Within 2 weeks, Vane Meridian filed for bankruptcy protection. It was not sudden, it was math. Astafall had refused emergency refinancing. Investors had withdrawn. Vendors had stopped deliveries. Payroll had failed. The credit line was frozen. Other lenders had issued notices. Legal review had exposed possible fraud. Personal guarantees were under examination. Callum's cars, accounts, club memberships, and luxury assets were listed, frozen, or prepared for sale. Callum called Briar again and again. She never answered. Tamsin handled every message. Briar did not celebrate. That surprised people who did not know her. At Astafall, she sat with Leora and reviewed the employee impact report. Names filled the pages: receptionists, payroll clerks, warehouse workers, assistants, people who had not forged signatures or hidden debts, people who had simply trusted the company name on their paychecks. Briar placed the report down. People who packed orders and answered phones, did not forge signatures. Protect what we can. Through Astafall's lawful borrower assistance channels and a separate foundation linked to Vale Lantern Trust, she helped create a transition fund for innocent employees affected by the collapse. Severance support, job placement assistance, emergency household grants, quiet help without press, without speeches. It was the first thing she did that felt like herself again. Then Callum came to Tamsin's office. He stood outside in the hallway, unshaven, furious, and smaller than Briar remembered. Not physically, something inside him had shrunk. Tamsin allowed Briar to speak with him only in the building lobby, with security nearby. Callum looked at her as if she had stolen his world. "You were my wife." Briar held her purse with both hands. That was the first thing you spent." His face twisted. "You could have saved me." She looked at him for a long moment. She saw the man who had held her hand at her father's funeral, the man who had promised she would never be alone, the man who had let his mistress sit in her chair. "I did," she said. "For 12 years, you mistook rescue for weakness." Callum opened his mouth, but nothing useful came out. At Graykin, Marable stood by the estate gate holding a box of personal items. Her driver had left. Her staff no longer moved quickly at her voice. The gate that had once closed on Briar now waited behind her like judgment. "This family built this estate," Marable said to Orrin. Orrin looked at the stone walls, the wet grass, the windows Briar had once paid to repair. "No, Mrs. Vane," he said. "This family inherited it. Briar kept it standing." Marable had no answer. Months later, after temporary orders, financial disclosures, and the bankruptcy filings had stripped the lies down to paper, Briar sat in Tamsin's office as the final divorce ruling arrived. The court recognized Callum's financial misconduct, denied his attempt to silence Briar, and allowed evidence from the bank review to influence asset division and liability. Tamsin read the last page, then looked up. "You are free." Briar stared at the word dissolved. A marriage could be ended with one word. But the years inside it did not disappear so easily. Her phone rang. "Leora," Briar answered quietly. "The final recovery board vote is tomorrow," Leora said. "We need your closing statement." Leora said, "We need your closing statement." Briar looked at her father's fountain pen resting beside the divorce order. "I know what to say." And for the first time, she understood that freedom was not the end of the story. It was the part where she finally chose what to build from the ruins. The final vote took less than 3 minutes. That was what shocked Callum most when he heard about it later. A family empire that had taken generations to polish, 12 years for Briar to protect, and months for him to destroy was reduced to a formal motion, a seconded recommendation, and a quiet line entered into Astafall Bank's official record. Inside the Astafall boardroom, Briar sat at the head of the table with her father's fountain pen beside her. Around her the executives waited in silence. Leora sat to her right. Tamsin sat behind her as legal support. The recovery documents were stacked in front of every board member, each file marked with the same cold words. Vane Meridian Holdings Final Recovery Review. Briar stood. She did not look like the woman who had left Graykin Estate in the rain. She wore a simple dark suit, no pearls, no wedding ring, and no sign of the life Callum had tried to strip from her. Her voice was calm. "For years, I believed love meant helping people survive consequences they refused to face," she said. "I was wrong. Love without truth becomes protection for harm. Today, Astafall will protect its depositors, its employees, its lawful borrowers, and the record." No one interrupted. "This is not revenge," Briar continued. "This is responsibility." The board voted to proceed with full recovery, legal referral, and final action on the defaulted loans. Vane Meridian would not receive another emergency refinancing. The questioned documents would remain under review. The estate-backed collateral would be recovered according to law. Briar signed the final acknowledgement. No tears, no raised voice, only ink. Outside the bank, the public version of the scandal had already begun to spread. Vane Meridian had collapsed under defaulted loans. Executives had misused company funds. Estate collateral had been overvalued. Forged documents had triggered legal review. Sable had received improper benefits through company accounts. Marable's collateral representations were under scrutiny. Callum had filed for personal bankruptcy after his guarantees and legal liabilities overtook everything he still owned. The title people had whispered about for generations, the Vane name, now appeared beside words like default, fraud review, receiver, and bankruptcy. That was the part Marable could not bear. Sable did not survive the scandal either. Her brand deals vanished first. Then came the investor claims. Then the demand to return jewelry, wardrobe, and other benefits tied to company funds. She tried to say she had only accepted gifts from Callum, but invoices had a language charm could not change. The pearls she had worn at Graykin were returned in a padded evidence envelope, no longer a crown, no longer a trophy, only property connected to a ledger. Callum saw them once during a legal review and looked away. By then he had lost the company, The estate access, the club memberships, the cars, and most of the people who once laughed at his table. Nolan resigned from representing the family after the legal exposure deepened. Drayton gave a statement through counsel. Kea continued cooperating. Marable moved into a rented townhouse under strict financial limits, while her lawyers argued over what remained of the trust. Family that had told Briar she did not belong in Graykian now had to ask permission to remove furniture from it. Briar returned to the estate only once, not to claim it, not to celebrate, not to stand on the staircase where Marable had held her keys. She came because the receiver needed her signature to release several staff housing protections and settle unpaid wages from estate accounts. The front hall looked smaller than she remembered. The chandelier still glittered. The portraits still stared. The staircase still curved upward like old pride, but the house had changed. Or maybe Briar had. Mara met her near the doorway, eyes shining. "Mrs. Vane," Mara began, then stopped herself. "Miss Vale," Briar smiled softly. "Briar is fine." Oren stood beside the entry table, the same table where Nolan had placed the folder, the same place where Marable had held the keys, the same floor where Briar had stood with one suitcase while everyone waited for her to break. Oren's voice was quiet. "You should know most of the staff stayed only because you helped them leave properly." Briar looked around the hall. For 12 years, she had tried to make Graykian kinder than the people who owned it. She had mistaken endurance for peace. She had mistaken being needed for being loved. She had mistaken silence for strength until silence became a room where others could lie comfortably. Now she knew better. Strength was not letting people use your goodness as shelter from accountability. Strength was knowing when to close the door. Before leaving, Briar walked to the staircase. For a moment she could almost see them as they had been that night. Marable with the keys, Sable with the pearls, Callum with the divorce packet, Briar with one suitcase. Then the memory shifted. She saw the boardroom, Leora standing, Callum turning pale, the files opening, the records speaking, the truth doing what her tears never could. Briar touched the banister once, not with longing, but farewell. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Astafal's car waited near the gravel drive. She paused at the bottom step and looked back at Graykian Estate. It was still beautiful from far away, but now everyone knew what it looked like when touched. Weeks later, Briar opened a new employee recovery center funded through the Vale Lantern Foundation. Not with cameras, not with speeches, not with revenge dressed as charity. She opened it because innocent people had paid for Callum's pride. And Briar had never believed the powerless should carry the bill for the powerful. Nella found new work through the program. Mara retired with full back pay. Oren received a formal settlement and a recommendation letter written by Briar herself. Even Kea, though not innocent, avoided the worst outcome because he cooperated before the lies could bury more people. Callum watched the news from a temporary apartment his lawyer had arranged. No estate, no company, no Sable. No mother's power protecting him from consequences, just silence. For the first time in his life, no one was available to clean up after him. He saw Briar on the screen for less than 10 seconds. She was leaving the recovery center, speaking quietly to a former employee, her face calm, her shoulders steady. The reporter called her chairwoman Vale. Callum turned off the television. He had once told her not to fight people bigger than her. Now he finally understood. She had never needed to fight bigger. She had only needed to stand where the truth could see her. That evening, Briar returned to Astafal Bank after closing. The marble ceiling glowed softly above her, just as it had years ago when her father placed a hand on her shoulder and taught her that ownership was not about power. It was about responsibility. Leora met her near the boardroom doors. "The recovery fund approvals are complete," Briar nodded, "and the fraud referral with counsel. Properly documented." "Good," Leora hesitated. "Are you all right?" Briar looked through the glass wall at the city lights beyond the bank. For years she might have said yes because she wanted to make other people comfortable. This time she told the truth. "I am becoming all right." Leora smiled gently and left her alone. Briar walked into the empty boardroom and placed her father's fountain pen on the table, the same pen she had carried out of Graykian. The same pen she had used to sign the authorization Callum called ruin. The same pen that reminded her that consent, truth and silence all had weight. She did not feel victorious. Victory was too loud a word for what remained after betrayal. She felt clear, and clarity was better. Briar looked at the chair where Callum had sat during the emergency meeting, begging for the mercy he had never given her. Then she looked at her own chair, not the one Sable had taken at Graykian. Not the one Marable had moved near the service door, not the one Callum had thought he could empty with divorce papers. This chair had her name on it, Briar Vale, and this time no one else was sitting in it. She picked up her father's pen, turned off the boardroom light, and walked out without looking back, because some women do not become powerful after betrayal. Some women were powerful all along. The betrayal only made everyone else find out. If this story moved you, subscribe for more, and comment, Karma, if you believe loyalty should never be mistaken for weakness.